Hey guys, it's Jane. It's not Friday again because my life is just not really allowed that to happen this week. It's Saturday again. Maybe one of these days I'll come up with an alternative thumbnail picture which doesn't have Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant on it, and so I can do something that doesn't involve Friday in the title. But as it is, we're just going to push on and pretend that it's Friday. It's Friday somewhere, I'm sure. So that's what this is. I finished 3 books this week. The first 2 weren't super exciting. The third one was a really good read, but I also have some reservations about it. So let's skip through the first 2 quickly so I can talk about the third one. The first book was Hot Water by P.G. Wodehouse. I love Wodehouse. This just happened not to be top tier Wodehouse. Not top tier Wodehouse is still a very enjoyable, diverting light read, but if you were looking for a place to start with Wodehouse, and I've been asked this a couple of times lately, I would probably suggest the Jeeves and Wooster books. This is the there's a 5-volume omnibus of the Wooster books, the Jeeves books, and this is the first volume, and the first book in the omnibus is Thank You Jeeves, and that is actually a super corker of a book and a great place to start. I actually read the first couple of pages of it while I was thinking about what I was going to say in this video and nearly wet myself laughing on the couch. So I'm thinking I might see if I can sneak in a reread of that sometime this weekend. That's where I would suggest that you start rather than Hot Water, for example. But it wasn't terrible, it just wasn't top tier Wodehouse. The second book that I read this week was much more disappointing. That was Jesus and the Eightfold Path by Lavie Tidhar. I just found the cover completely compelling, and I remember I said last week that it had to be worth a chuckle, and that's where I was misled. This is not a funny book. It's not intended to be a funny book. It's kind of a Buddhist reimagining of the Jesus story, and there's all this kind of fairly worthy kind of tut-tutting about mistakes that Jesus made in his life and ministry. It's as if Jesus is kind of a sort of disappointing reincarnation of the Buddha. And what can I say that's good about it? It was certainly had some interesting ideas, and it's not long, but yeah, from a Christian perspective, which is totally where I am, I thought that it really missed the point in a lot of the stories, and plus it wasn't really funny. So yeah, oh well. The third book that I read this week was a much more enjoyable read, Europe at Midnight by Dave Hutchinson. This is the second of the Fractured Europe books, which is this kind of marriage between a modern political thriller set in a post-EU breakdown world and a sort of science fiction alternate reality kind of story. I find it difficult to say much about the plot of this one because I don't know how much I can say about this one without spoiling stuff for the first book. The world that Hutchinson has come up with here is so interesting. Observations about politics, about sort of nation statehood and how power works. The characterization is also quite strong, like the individual characters in the story you get behind and you kind of feel for. Having said that, I think this book, the structure of how it works, was much less coherent than the first book. You're constantly being jumped into situations that read as though they've been introduced. Characters read as though we know who they are, but they've never been name-checked before. I kept rechecking Goodreads, thinking there was clearly a book between the one that I'd read and this one that I'd missed. That's what it felt like. The other thing that I had trouble with is that it's often from a first person point of view, but who the first person is changes, and you don't get told that. You have to figure it out. So all of a sudden, like, there's a new chapter and you don't know where you are, or who you are, or when you are. You have to kind of figure that out from context. And yeah, this has not been the week for a kind of read like that, which challenges the grey cells at that sort of level. With all of that, it was still a highly enjoyable read, and I'm on the wait list now to get the third book, which has recently come out, which was Europe in winter. I don't know whether that's a concluding volume or if it's just another one in the series. It's definitely worth persisting, I feel like, because the story and the world is just so engrossing, but the actual storytelling mechanics in this second volume made it less enjoyable than it could have been. So that's what I've read this week. As far as what I am going to be reading over the weekend and into the following week, I got this one in the mail during the week. Wizard of the Crow. I do not know how to pronounce the author's name. I picked this one up because of a rant video that I watched about Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. And amongst the list of people that really should have got the award rather than him, this guy's name came up, and it was somebody I've never heard of. The guy lives in the States now basically as a political exile because of his earlier writings. Got him thrown in prison. So they're obviously important literature in a world sense, but I've been told that this one actually is quite funny as well. I've read just the first few pages, and I can see that it has the potential for being quite, wry and humorous. So I don't think I've been totally misled so far, but it's a paper book and it's a bit of a tome, and I'm not so great with paper books that are thick. So we'll just have to see how much progress I make on that one. Last night I just needed a comfort read, and so I picked up Neal Stephenson's Reamde, which is one of my favourite books of all time, and I'm already kind of well and truly into the story just overnight. So that's one that I'm reading. That is a fantastic kidnap heist thriller. It starts in North America and it ends up, a globe-trotting kind of adventure. And our two main characters, Richard Forthrast and his adopted niece Zula, are just two of the great characters of fiction written in the last 10 years. So this is a big recommendation. If you are interested in picking up a Stephenson, this I think is actually, despite the fact that it's long, this is a great place to start because it's got all the elements of a Stephenson story in a really page-turny kind of read. So that's it. That's what's going on with me. In other news, I'm going to a costume party at the end of the week on Friday. I've been invited. I've got a girlfriend's turning 40 and she doesn't know any better, clearly. So she's having a costume party. I haven't been to a costume party since I was like 8, I think. So I'm thinking hard. I haven't actually got a costume together. It's going to be one of those last minute scratched around things. It's got a fairy tale theme, and we'll see what I come up with. Who knows, if I manage to film Friday morning, maybe I'll show you what I have got so far to wear. Who knows? I hope you're well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.